Libertarios Hispanos presents a look at the 2016 movie Brothers, directed by Ah Gan. It's a mainland Chinese, state-produced wartime action movie that combines elements of film noir, comic book action, and surrealist cinematography with the historical backdrop of the Chinese Civil War. This movie is full of action, it's fun, and at times outlandish, meaning the audience is in for an entertaining hour and a half. It is worth a watch if you like Asian films or war films in general, if you don't mind subtitles, and if you know how to read between the lines of what is art and what's political propaganda. As enjoyable as this movie is, there is no denying this movie is the Chinese Communist Party's ripoff of 300. I don't mean it was inspired by 300, I mean this movie is a remake of 300, with Red Army soldiers as the Spartans and nationalist soldiers as the Persians. Everything from the motion comic book opening and end credits, to the juxtaposition of the color red with dark colors, the use of surreal day and night skies, a young warrior trying to survive in the wilderness, exaggerated righteous-looking heroes, and evil-looking villains, slow-motion leaping attacks, slow-motion cavalry charges, sword fights, exaggerated blood, slow-motion rotating angles, right down to all the good guys dying while fighting off legions of enemy hordes to the last man. As if to prove that this movie's resemblance to 300 wasn't an accident, the movie also blatantly rips off Sin City in the film noir aspect, the comic book surrealism, and down to the juxtaposition of black and white with specific colored objects. Seriously, if this had been made by an American studio the way it was made by China's State Film Bureau, Frank Miller and Zack Snyder would be suing for $1 billion. As if the Chinese Communist Party wanted to give Hollywood a giant middle finger, there's one segment where in less than 5 minutes, this movie blatantly photocopies iconic elements from Sin City, Akira Kurosawa's High and Low, every Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola movie ever made, the James Bond series, and finally, Tae Guk Gi, the Brotherhood of War. It even has a little bit of Batman. Now there's a big difference between inspired by and paying homage to another artist, and then there's blatant plagiarism. We libertarians generally oppose intellectual property and copyright laws because they protect big companies' monopolies on images rather than protecting the work of individual artists. And we support a Creative Commons system where anyone can use your work, but you own it, and they must give you credit. In that regard, this movie is a travesty, considering how the Chinese Communist Party zealously guards the intellectual property of Chinese artists and companies, while blatantly ripping off the rest of the world. If you can get past that, then Brothers is a movie that's fun, full of action, has cool fight scenes, and due to the comic book surrealism, the political propaganda is much less in your face than in other Chinese military movies coming out in the era of Xi Jinping. I wonder from whose surrealist comic books the visuals are lifted. Brothers is the story of two brothers living as street rats in urban China during the early phases of the Chinese Civil War, sometime in the 1930s. One is physically weak and cowardly, but has a gift for playing the piano, while the other is a thug who's just gotten out of prison. Due to their poverty, they try to pull off a dine and dash and end up getting in a fight with a bouncer guarding the back door, which they lose. They get arrested, and instead of going to prison, they get drafted into the Nationalist Army, commonly called the Kuomintang, because the Kuomintang Party controlled the government and put its party logo on the Chinese flag and on the uniforms of the military and police. The thug brother doesn't want his little brother to die in war, so he tries to jump off the army truck with his brother, except only the younger brother manages to escape. This is the last we see of the older brother for a while, as the younger brother is stranded alone in the wilderness and running for his life. I wonder where the screenwriters got the idea of two poor brothers trying to survive in the big city, one tough and one weak but intellectually gifted, forced into the army,
torn apart by a war they did not believe in.
And then separated in the chaos of trying to survive in war. The younger brother is then rescued by soldiers of the People's Liberation Army, aka the Communists. Flash forward 5 years to a Frank Miller and Zack Snyder-esque battle between the Communists and the Nationalists, with a little bit of Saving Private Ryan sprinkled on top. The younger brother is a junior commander in the PLA. In that era, it was common for the Red Army to get low-ranking POWs to switch sides, so that's a theme that pops up in a lot of other Chinese historical dramas, one of them being huo jie, to live. Notice the German army helmets worn by the Red Army troops. Before Nazi Germany was allied with Imperial Japan, which invaded China in 1930 and 1937, Germany was allied with nationalist China, and Hitler wanted to project power in Asia by helping Jiang Jieshi fight the communists. The Kuomintang army uniform of the 1930s and 40s was loosely based on the Wehrmacht uniform and even included German helmets. The PLA was notoriously poor for many decades, so they typically equipped themselves with provisions captured by the Japanese and the Kuomintang. In this movie, the communist soldiers wear captured Kuomintang helmets with the Nationalist Party symbol removed. In the style of Frank Miller and Zack Snyder, everything in this scene is in black and white except for the communist flags, the blood, and the gunfire and explosions. Obviously, this plays up the prominence of the Marxist symbolism. There's a scene in the beginning where the thuggish older brother has sex with a white prostitute. There are two things being reflected in this scene. Now, one theme that the Chinese Communist Party loves to play on endlessly is that China has historically been weak and dominated by Western powers. In this propaganda film, we see a Chinese man sexually dominating a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Western woman, symbolically reversing China's role as the submissive. However, she's not his lover. She's a prostitute, and her only aim is to make money. This is the CCP's subtle way of reminding its predominantly Chinese audiences of how the West has totally corrupted Chinese culture and morality. Then there's some strong symbolism in this low-key scene right before the battle where 300 meets Saving Private Ryan with Sin City's color schemes. The younger brother is now the badass Commander Chen, and his unit has a visit from an Associated Press reporter with a Cary Grant haircut, whom Chen passes off to his runner because he has the real work to do. The character is a Chinese reporter, but he's working for the AP, the Western media. And his first name is Jason. The Anglo first name means he's from Hong Kong. Then he shares a cigarette with a soldier who's still visibly a young boy, while no one else is smoking. So there's a Chinese guy with an English name who's working for the Western media and corrupting the health and morals of a teenage boy, while the Chinese communist commander doesn't have time to talk to the media because he's busy doing patriotic China stuff. The implication is not only that Chinese folks should disregard the Western media, but also that Hong Kongers aren't real Chinese, and they should be disregarded as well. So for several years before the CCP finally subjugated Hong Kong, mainland Chinese audiences had been fed subtle anti-Hong Kong images by their government-controlled media for several years. Also, compare the depictions of Western hedonism with the stoicism of Commander Chen and the bravery of the political commissar leading troops into battle. The PLA wins the battle, but Commander Chen loses his best friend, so he vents his rage by killing a POW. He tries to kill a second POW, but his own men stop him because it violates the Geneva Convention. First, this is pure propaganda because the nationalist Chinese government barely joined the old version of the Geneva Convention in 1935. The communist regime didn't join the Geneva Conventions until 1956, so it's ridiculous that they're invoking this in this movie. Also, the Chinese Communist Party is against the execution of prisoners for human rights reasons? Give me a break! Chen is sent to military prison and put on death row, but gets a last-minute reprieve because the party has a special mission for him: to escort a troupe of musicians to the recently captured Gao town to hold a patriotic New Year's concert for the Red Army troops.
他们是这个残酷世界里 最美的颜色，值得你牺牲生命去保护它们。
Then the movie borrows from The Lord of the Rings, while Commander Chen is a reluctant Aragorn escorting the hobbits through the treacherous mountains. And wouldn't you know it, they get attacked by orcs. Orcs fighting against a Marxist revolution. It turns out that the thuggish older brother who didn't escape is now a nationalist officer and a battle-hardened veteran, and the two brothers meet as enemies in battle. Now, where have I seen this movie before? But the CCP reminds us that the communists are better than the nationalists at both war and kung fu. We have the big dramatic reveal, which is dramatic irony because we knew immediately from the scar who the guy was, even though his own younger brother doesn't know yet. Bro, give me a hug. No, we're at war! This is a conundrum that's existed for Marxists since 1848. Am I loyal to my family or to my party first? Because he was given another chance by the party, the younger brother goes out of his way to respect the lives of his prisoners. This is where we see the difference in their personalities tie into Chinese politics. Chen the nationalist is scarred, crass, and vulgar, while Chen the communist is handsome, clean, disciplined, and has integrity. It even shows in the way the thuggish older brother is dressed in a fur coat like a wealthy gangster, while the communist brother wears a humble PLA uniform. During another skirmish between the PLA and Kuomintang, the older Chen stuns his younger brother with a sucker punch and tries to fulfill his original plan for the two of them to desert, but the younger brother refuses to go. His loyalties are with the revolution and the Communist Party. The not-so-subtle implication here is that loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party trumps loyalty to one's own family. So then Bad Chen kidnaps one of the musicians and rides off in order to lure Good Chen away from the group. He takes the woman to a nearby brothel that's frequented by nationalist soldiers. There are several blatant hints throughout the movie that Good Chen is a virgin, and the kidnapped woman happens to be the one that Good Chen has a crush on. So while Good Chen is a virgin, Bad Chen is a whoremonger who's now corrupting and defiling this young, pure communist patriot woman who's supposed to be performing for the troops. He pulls out wads of cash to clear the room for... wait for it. For the woman to play piano for him, just like his little brother used to play the piano for him. And if you didn't figure it out in the first 10 minutes, this movie leans heavily on Debussy's Clair de Lune, which is fair since Hollywood has already used that song to death. But wait, I thought Western influences should be disregarded. In one of several confrontations between the two brothers on the way to Gaotown, it's revealed that the older brother used to be a decent person who was just trying to survive, but that society turned him into an animal. However, everything that he personally suffered was worth it because, in his words, his brother became a human being. And now, what he wants to prevent more than ever is his little brother losing his life in Gaotown, where the nationalist army is on the way to overrun the outnumbered and ill-equipped communist garrison. However, Good Chen is dedicated to his mission and not afraid to lose his life, even if it means that his older brother's suffering will have been for nothing. Despite Bad Chen's psychotic behavior, he is clearly the reasonable person in the room. This war has nothing to do with him, and all he wants is for himself and his brother to live happily and in peace, whereas the other two are both satisfied with dying for the Chinese Communist Party. We'll skip forward to Gaotown to avoid some unnecessary spoilers. Gaotown is about to be overrun, and the regimental commander cancels the concert and orders Good Chen to evacuate the musicians. However, they protest and insist on doing the concert for the troops. They don't care if their life is in mortal danger. They have revolutionary discipline and insist on completing their original mission, as if their music can make up for the lack of ammunition and reinforcements for the defenders. Predictably, the city is bombed and then besieged by the Nationalist Army, who are unmistakably the comic book villain Persians from the graphic novel and movie 300. The PLA defenders will make their valiant last stand until the two brothers have their final confrontation. You can probably guess how the movie ends, but I won't spoil it for you. The movie is enjoyable to watch if you don't mind subtitles, but the political overtones are definitely noticeable. The film is visually beautiful to look at, and this interpretation of the Cain and Abel archetype was interesting. But the film didn't do anything new. They blatantly copied what was done in a laundry list of foreign blockbusters while leaning most heavily on the visuals from Sin City and 300. The only original thing done was rebooting 300 in 1930s China. This glimpse at the movie was meant to show you a fascinating example of how popular art can be interwoven with political propaganda in ways that differ from our politics, and with a very different outlook on who is a hero. There are many themes in this movie to unpack. Kuomintang soldiers are portrayed as cold and cruel, while the communists are either brave and strong or young and pure.
他们是这个残酷世界里最美的颜色。
Whereas the good Chen used to be weak, the PLA made him strong. While the bad Chen is interested in his personal dreams, the good Chen has a sense of purpose and he puts the party before his own dreams. The movie portrays Chinese communist soldiers as devout Buddhists, and nationalist soldiers defiling the Buddha, even though the Chinese Communist Party conquered Tibet and the CCP's repression drove the Dalai Lama into exile. Western influences are an immoral cancer on China, while the people with morals are the virgins who stay true to the party even to their deaths. Never mind the Western theme song for this movie. Disregard the Western media, and Hong Kongers aren't real Chinese. We see a message that Chinese patriots must be prepared to kill other Chinese, and nationalist China is the enemy. We see PLA soldiers dying en masse for the revolution, and even civilians are willing to risk their lives to the very end to support their troops. Let me catch some bullets that would otherwise have been fired at the PLA. I say again, let me catch some bullets that would otherwise have been fired at the PLA, so that the Red Army can fight on. Chinese patriots will overcome every obstacle and fight to the very end for the party and for China, because according to the party, the two are one and the same. It's a point of pride that millions have died in the meat grinder for the Communist Party to rise to power and make China strong. That's why loyalty to the party comes before loyalty to family. China's greatness has come at a terrible price, but through the deaths and martyrdom of loyal Chinese communists, their party became a world power. It is China's destiny to be great, and that China's greatness must come at a terrible cost. Thank you for watching Libertarios Hispanos.